It's not mandatory.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you planning to run away or you're just sitting on the Come here.
That's most expensive ticket. Always. Yeah. Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming and thank you for joining the Russia and Eurasia Program and the Center for Strategic Studies event discussion about the economic and political and security repercussions of the Russia-Ukraine war for Belarus and Moldova. My name is Oleg Shakirov. I'm going to moderate this discussion. We have a wonderful panel. So to my right, I have Vladimir Dubovik. He's a visiting scholar and professor at Tufts at the Fletcher School. Yeah. And he has just arrived, so this is a long-awaited event. He's an associate professor at the Department of International Relations and director of the Center for International Studies at Odessa Mechnikov National University in Ukraine. He's also one of the preeminent Ukrainian experts in the field of international affairs, security studies, and foreign policy analysis. He has done research in several U.S. institutes, including Kennan Institute, Center for International and Security Studies, and he has taught at the University of Washington and the University of Texas, and he's my fellow Fulbright alumni. His expertise covers Black Sea regional security, Ukraine's foreign policy and security, and transatlantic relations and U.S.-Ukraine relations. So to my right is Miroslava Gangadze. She's an Eastern Europe chief at Voice of America. She's also a campaigner for human rights and international media freedoms. Miroslava was granted political asylum in the United States in 2001 following the murder of her husband, high-profile investigative Ukrainian journalist Georgy Gangadze. Beyond her role as a chief at Voice of America, regional chief at Voice of America, she's often invited to speak as the subject matter expert in various forums discussing politics, democratization, media in Ukraine, and she also lived in the region in past month, and she has direct experience of this current conflict. And to my left is Vitaly Shklyarov. Vitaly is a former Harvard University visiting scholar. He's a columnist and award-winning political strategist with extensive experience in foreign policy and international elections and grassroots campaigns. He's a book author and a former political prisoner in Belarus, which I'm sure some of you know about. And he's an expert on US-European affairs, Belarusian and Ukrainian domestic politics, and Russian influence abroad. He's an activist and co-architect of the first ever political Uber, no-cost political incubator for running for office, and he currently lives in Kyiv in Ukraine. He previously also worked in US politics. He worked on both Barack Obama's and Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns, and he has received 12 American Association of Political Consultants Award, which is the highest prize for political work and activism. And actually, if you weren't here yesterday, we watched a new movie that was produced by Vitaly. So with that said, I will just announce this subject today is repercussions of this conflict for Belarus and Moldova. Of course, the focus of attention of the current war is on Ukraine and Russia, but there are other countries in the region that have been in different ways involved in this conflict. And Belarus has long been Russia's closest ally, but in this war, it has been directly involved in this conflict. And recently, there were additional rumors or statements that indicate that Belarus might be even more involved in this conflict. So Vitaly, how would you describe Belarus' role so far, and do you expect it to be involved in sending some troops to Ukraine, or maybe in any other way?
So we'll do it in the form of question and or remarks or
So we'll start with remarks and then we will open for questions of the audience.
Okay. Speaking about attention, first of all, thank you so much for having me here for a kind introduction. And when we speak about the attention, and as you said, while everyone's attention is focused on dramatic events unfolding in Ukraine, the West should not forget that Belarus and particularly Kremlin currently waging two wars, not just one in Ukraine, but one in Belarus as well. So Belarus is another occupied country. Belarus has been occupied for quite a long time, and a key ally of Russia in this war. Another famous dictator, Lukashenko, has already defended from the day one, or actually before the war, defended the war. And in my opinion, the big question, the elephant in the room, Belarusian invasion will almost certainly take place. And frankly, there is no major difference whether Lukashenko entering the ground war or not, because the invasion of Belarus, in my opinion, has taken place already, and the defeat of Belarus and Russia in this war has taken place already as well. So Belarus, in my opinion, as I said, de facto at jure already is part of this conflict, and by supporting Russian aggression. It provides its territory, it provides, as you know, the infrastructure and assistance to injured Russian troops. This is one of the biggest portion of the how. And if Belarusians boots on land on Ukrainian soil, in my opinion, just the list of the war criminals will include Belarusian surnames. However, little will change for Belarus as a country. I believe we should point out the elephant in the room. Belarus has started the war against Ukraine on 24th February 2022. And this brings a couple of consequences within for Belarus. And I just want to briefly go over those consequences, and we'll gladly open up later and answer the questions. So first of all, we should talk about severe political destabilization in Belarus. Unlike Putin, who even during the time of a war enjoys considerable support in Russia, according to official and unofficial estimates, public approval rating of Putin is around 60%. Lukashenko, on the flip side, his support doesn't hit barely 30% of Belarusians. So consequently, even if, let's say, Russia's participation in the war might not be fatal for Putin personally, I believe, and this is one of the consequences, I believe this war is and will be deadly for Belarusian dictator. Secondly, as a consequence, I believe it is with the war in Ukraine an ultimate end of an idea of Belarusian Union. Likely due to the war, Russia has lost its opportunity to advocate for the peaceful integration of Belarus in Russia, like it has been doing before for many, many decades. And if many Belarusians had looked up to Russia as a kind of a older brother or ally who provided support and stability for many, many years, now this image is forever gone. Thirdly, talking about this Belarusian Union, that brings me to the point that the idea of the Russian sphere of influence is also fails. The stillborn idea of the Russian world that famously Putin is preaching is now buried forever. I believe the Putin regime has lost obviously not only Ukraine, but Belarus, I believe, forever as well. So there will be no, and this is the good news, there will be no restoration of so-called Soviet Union. I believe the end of the era of Soviet time has long come and gone. So with this war, I believe this is also a big impact on Belarus, since Belarus is considered as the last biggest ally of Russia, but also as the last place on Earth as a Soviet architecture and Soviet political system alive. Firstly, as a result, it will bring the necessity of regime change in Russia. It's clear, I believe, that the war in Ukraine will end, ultimately end when Putin's regime is gone. So as long as Putin rules Russia, Ukraine will never be safe, and therefore the ultimate overthrow of Putin regime is one of Ukraine's, I believe, long-term military goals. And as Lukashenko is an actual and loyal ally of Putin, the all of Lukashenko's regime will ultimately incomparably weaken regimes of Putin as well. So I believe the liberation of Belarus would bring the weaken at least the Putin's grip on Russia and strengthen Ukraine. After all, free Belarus is a reliable, or should be a reliable ally in the fight against the Kremlin, and no longer a launching pad for rockets and dangerous northern front of Ukraine. And lastly, I want to point out naturally efforts by Ukraine to eliminate authoritarian and totalitarian regimes will be met with support from the West. We already see it, and it will be more because the era of, I call it in some of the articles, the monkey with grenade is the most powerful destabilization factor in modern global politics. And therefore, Ukraine can demand any concessions it wants from the West in pursuing its fight against Putin and Lukashenko. Eliminating Lukashenko is and will be a necessary step which neither the United States or European Union should spare any expenses for. And therefore, to conclude, the liberation of Belarus may be in terms of this war, maybe the most important strategic goal for Ukraine once the war is concluded, but also during the war in order to save 1,084 kilometer, 1/3 of the whole border with Russia, which is roughly over 2,400 kilometers, to secure this border. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vitaly, and I think we will return to some of the points. But I would like to turn to Miroslava. So Miroslava, we know that Moldova has not been involved in this conflict, but there were many speculations in the past month about how it could potentially be involved. For example, several Russian officials mentioned that the extension of the front lines and the occupation of territories up to Moldova was the ultimate goal of the operation. Then, of course, Moldova was one of the causes of Ukrainian refugees. What is your assessment about the current situation in and around Moldova, and what do people in other countries in the region in Ukraine think about the potential for the ongoing war expanding to Moldova or somehow affecting its regional position.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, I have to say that I have been active participant and an observer of development in the region, specifically, I mean, obviously in Ukraine, but in the region for the last 30 years. And at this time around this year, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, covering the war in Ukraine and following Ukrainian forces, talking to Ukrainian commanders and assessing their ability to withstand Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I have to say, in terms of going back to in terms of Moldova, in contrast with Belarus, is being very vocal, took the vocal position against Russian aggression, and pro-Western President Maya Sandu's actually being very careful, looking at her country as a weak and poor, still stood up to Russian aggression and supported Ukrainian position in this fight. And going back to March of, February and March of this year, we have to say that nobody really expected that Ukraine would be able to withstand this huge Russian military aggression. And it was from the analyst's point of view, it was very clear that if Ukraine would fall in 3 or 4 days or even months, the Belarus and basically Moldova would be the next. And Moldova has a very vulnerable position because of Transnistria. The early, history, we know history in early 90s, part of Moldova in between Ukraine and Moldova was occupied by Russian forces, and it's a very small kind of strip of land. However, it's a basis for Russian forces, and it have been basis for Russian forces since then. So basically, Russians already installed some of the, if they're sending troops right now to Belarus and creating this unity between Russian and Belarusian forces in Transnistria, they already have bases, and that was a goal for Russians, that if to build this bridge on this, occupy the south and build this bridge to Moldova and occupy all the regions. However, it didn't turn out how Russians planned, and now we see how forceful, resolute, and strong Ukrainian army have been. However, in the last week or so, we saw the deliberate effort by Russian forces to, forces meaning political forces as well, and pro-Russian forces specifically in Moldova, to destabilize the situation in Moldova. With the latest attack on Ukraine, latest rocket attack specifically, Ukraine had to cut 30% of its energy, electricity to Moldova, and basically, and they together had to cut electricity to European states. And that created a huge, in some way, opportunity for Russians to destabilize Moldova. And what has been happening, the protest movement in front of Sandu Palace and other places that are trying to create so-called new revolution in Moldova and build the or change the regime in Moldova to more friendly Russian regime, and to create something like they already have in Belarus, basically to connect Transnistria and Moldova and let Moldovan be more friendly, and or maybe open the new front to Ukraine. It's hard to predict what would happen. However, from the assessing from the front, from the Ukrainian forces front and from the support of the West, it looks like Ukraine is making a lot of progress toward clearing its territory. One thing we can say that the fate of Ukraine and fate of Belarus would be decided in Ukraine. Basically, the fate of the world can be in the region for sure will be decided in Ukraine. And the fact that Moldova and Ukraine already got the pass to European Union is a sign that if the war if the government, Sandu government would be able to prevail and sustain itself, it's clearly would be a new opportunity for Moldova to build its economy and develop as an independent state. But again, it's all depend on the war in Ukraine and how successful will be Ukrainian forces. Russian strategy was very clear. We have every time we are talking about today, we have to look in the past, and Russians was very clear from the start, from 1991. I would like to take you back to this Belarus forest where Boris Yeltsin and Belarusian Shushkevich and Ukrainian Kravchuk were deciding the fate of Soviet Union. And yes, back then, President Yeltsin reluctantly signed the agreement to dissolve the Soviet Union, but Russia never gave up the idea or gave up their imperialistic position or idea to hold Soviet Union together. And all this years, 92 Transnistria, 94 Abkhazia, then war in Georgia, all this time they were creating those spots to control the region one way or another. And I was recently at this Warsaw Security Forum, and analysts and officials all agree that the fact that West was so complicit with Russian politics and was trying to basically closing their eyes on their aggression or in all these last 30 years lead to this current situation that we have right now. And this is like the critical moment today in the history of the region and in the world. And that would decide the future of the region and thank you.
Thank you, Miroslava. Vladimir, I'm sure our participants have many questions about what's happening in Ukraine, but since we talk about the repercussions for other regional countries, I would like to ask you, what is the view from Ukraine on this on its neighborhood? Do people or do authorities or people there make distinction between Russia and Belarus, since Belarus is so much involved in the war? Do you expect, as Miroslav described, that there is any concerns about the new front in Moldova, that Moldova could turn from a supportive and friendly state to a potential source of threat? So what is your personal view, and how do Ukrainian people and Ukrainian authorities view this situation right now?
Right. Thank you. So just to do away with your questions, I should say that no, Moldova is not seen as a threat or even a potential threat. Just to a smaller scale or size of Moldova or whatever might happen there domestically, even with pro-Russian forces coming back to power, there would hardly be a threat to us anymore. With Belarus, yes, people distinguish positions of ordinary Belarusians on one hand and Lukashenko regime on the other hand, but it doesn't help because Belarusian territory is being used against Ukraine. And here I would disagree with Vitaly. He said that yeah, it doesn't matter if there is an aggression from Belarusian territory again against Ukraine. It does for us. Obviously, if there's more of Russian troops and Belarusian troops together with them coming over the border into Ukraine, that would be a problem for us. We have a long front line already as it is. It's 2,500 kilometers. So someone put it in a straight line on the map of Europe, and it was from Warsaw to Madrid. So that's how long the front line is. If you add up a certain more of troops movement across the Ukrainian border from Belarus, that's a problem. I don't think that happens, though. Most military experts don't expect this to happen. Not to mention the Belarusian military force is not huge. They're not very well prepared, not very well trained, definitely not a match to Ukrainian military right now. But of course, with Ukrainian military being overwhelmed by fighting Russian troops, that could be a problem if they actually move in. And that's why probably if there is some pressure from Moscow on Minsk to actually join the aggression, that would be the logic, that there is a certain, if not a stalemate, actually basically initiative is now on the Ukrainian side, but if there is a stalemate, then you add up some Belarusian troops and that would be a problem for Ukraine, but I don't think they will do it because actually now Ukraine also has better weapons than they used to have in February and March. So if Belarusians decide to move into Ukraine, they will be quickly annihilated with HIMARS and other more contemporary modern military technologies. And frankly, I don't think they will be doing this. There's been even questions about whether they will surrender the moment they move across the border. Are they capable of fighting or not? We don't know that. But going back to the general question on the theme of our conversation today, I think the future of this region or sub-region or whatever, or maybe it depends on how you look at it, it could be mega region or inter-region, is very much depends obviously on how this Russian aggression against Ukraine ends. It's a common space for all the states that we've just mentioned already several times. It's a single space, there are many names for it. Historically, it's been a single space. If you remember the heritage and legacy of Great Duchess of Lithuania, for instance, and the Polish concept from Morza to Morza, so from the sea to the sea. There's very fashionable concept of intermarium again, and Three Seas initiative that Ukraine is taking part actively in. I myself, by the way, kind of skeptical about the future of this project, but a discussion about the Baltic Black Sea region security zone is something that we are having. And actually, my department, my Center for International Studies in Odessa, we've been part of a number of projects focused on the Baltic Black Sea security cooperation. So that's an interesting subject for us. What will happen? Of course, Russian aggression should be defeated, and Belarusian regime should change for that area to be finally free and democratic and prosperous eventually, ultimately, and secure and safe. So it's complicated. It's quite an agenda. I mean, it's an ambitious one. I mean, let's start with defeating Russia, and then also Lukashenko regime would be actually in danger, but I'll go back to that in a minute. So this space, which was once called as a Western newly independent states, that's interesting. We're not using it anymore. I mean, we used it in the early 90s, this acronym Western NIS, but we are using it. It's a new Eastern Europe, it's a greater Eastern Europe. That's where you have Ukraine and Belarus and Moldova. So three very important countries, and obviously members of Eastern Partnership, and obviously very important for the European policy and NATO policy in the region. And that's why you can actually expect more of an active role, I think, by various international organizations, including EU, including NATO, maybe eventually in terms of posturing towards this three countries. And Ukraine is a key element here, obviously. It's recognized by both Chisinau and Minsk. There have been some tensions recently with Belarus, has been mentioned already. There have been some talks about them doing some trainings again and maybe moving closer to the border. Like I said, probably not going to happen. If the huge Russian contingent in February and March wasn't successful in moving closer towards Kyiv and actually had to withdraw eventually, then a smaller Belarusian force contingent would probably definitely be not that successful either. If they decide to move further down the west on the border towards, I don't know, Rovno or Rivne or or Lutsk or something. I don't think they will be successful there either, because actually Ukrainian troops have been getting ready there, and it's a very difficult terrain for them to move in, and it's also mined territory and under very close supervision now of Ukrainian military and intelligence services. However, like I said, Belarus could be distracting. So one of the ideas is to as military experts would say, is to fixate certain Ukrainian troops away from major battlegrounds, being Kherson or Donbass or other areas, or Kharkiv region or Luhansk region. If you're Ukrainian, you would have to keep a certain number of troops just in case Belarusians decide to move across the border. That's a problem because we need all those troops combat ready and combat capable in different parts of the front line. So that's a problem. In terms of Moldova, again, Transnistria has never been a huge problem. Earlier in this massive war, there have been some worries about what's going to happen to Transnistria, and there was probably a plan for Russia to surround and encircle my hometown of Odessa and the region troops, but they only wanted to do it, in a three-pronged kind of an operation. So the land forces coming closer to Odessa, and they had to go through Kherson and Mykolaiv region, obviously. And then Transnistrian, garrison would be used, and then also maybe a naval landing operation. None of that happened, and none of them is in the cards anymore. Russian troops met their, what military experts call, culminating moment, long time ago in Kherson, and they couldn't get by Mykolaiv. They couldn't get by Voznesensk as well, north of Mykolaiv. So that's it. I mean, the land forces never got any close to Odessa or Transnistria for that matter. Transnistria itself, we're talking about 1,500 Russian military, and Russian military in name only. It's mostly locals who are not well trained, not well prepared, not well armed. So it's never been a major threat to us. Frankly, it's kind of a military threat that can be dealt with like police force of Odessa region, not to mention Ukrainian military. So, and the landing operation is not in the cards anymore, because the Russian Navy is vulnerable to attacks by Ukrainian missiles, Neptunes and Harpoons now and more. And even prior to us receiving those missiles, we've been using the coast artillery and even anti-aircraft weapons very carefully and creatively in shooting at the Russian battleships. Not to mention that the sea was mined as well, and still is, in many areas. So I don't think Transnistria is a big deal, is a big problem for us here in Ukraine, security-wise. But finally, I think it's still the space is very important politically. It's important for the security, as Miroslava has said, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire Europe, maybe Eurasia, if you want to mention that term. Eurasia, yes, there's been a vacuum of security here. And that's why you have Russian invasion. They're moving into this gray zone, vacuum of security zone. So and ideological trends. That's most interesting, I think. Depending on how the war ends, this region will be either a bridge to kind of a new Russia eventually, potentially more democratic, more, transparent, more responsible, less aggressive and belligerent, or it could be cordon sanitaire. After all, again, historic concept, that if you're Europe, if you're the West, you put certain number of countries there in the region to defend against unpredictable and belligerent and aggressive Russia. Depending how the war ends, and everyone is horrified by the war, but what lessons do you draw? If you're horrified, one lesson you can draw that you're afraid, you're cowering, you kind of don't want to mess with Russia because Russia does what it does, this massive invasion. Oh my God, they're actually shooting at people and killing people and civilians and military and so on. Or you draw a different type of lesson, contrary to it, like, okay, you can actually defeat Russia. If Ukrainians are successful in doing some of it, if we do it together in the region, then maybe there is a chance for us. So, like I said, the horror of war in itself does not explain how people in the region treat this war and what they need to be doing in the future. Like, should they actually fight back? Or should they actually agree that, oh, okay, this is dominating force, even weakened Russia will dominate and prevail, so we have to be, be aware of this fact. And finally, like I said already, it's a huge role for third parties, European Union, NATO. It opens a new era for European, Euro-Atlantic perspective for all three countries mentioned here, Moldova, Belarus, and Ukraine. Ukraine obviously wants to be part of EU and NATO as we know it. And actually this current 7 months have brought back the idea of joining NATO eventually for Ukraine, even though in late February we were already ready for our government to make a statement that we're not going to NATO. But now, we even hearing from this country, from Washington, D.C., that, okay, this perspective of Ukraine joining NATO is back on the table, actually, because of Russian invasion and because of Russian invasion happening and because of Russian invasion happening in such a poor way for Russia. And finally, I would say that ideologically, of course, it's very important what happens here. Moldova is fledgling always between pro-Russian forces and pro-European forces. There domestically, if Russia loses this war, Ukraine wins this war, that's going to be a major, big deal for Moldova. It's going to be encouraging for pro-Western forces, for democracy forces, market economy and so on, more transparent energy sector, big deal for a small country like Moldova. And defend it against the potential invasion, because frankly, if the Russian troops would move through Mykolaiv and Kherson, they would move straight into Moldova. It wasn't just about Transnistria. Moldova itself was in danger. Everyone understood that. I remember the time when people were talking about like would Romanian forces actually enter Moldova from other side if Russian troops would come into Moldova proper. But that didn't happen because it never got close. But that's understood by Moldovans and Romanians and others, of course, to the west from Ukraine, that Ukraine has defended them against probable direct Russian invasion and aggression. And the most final thing is that there will be a revival of national cultures. That's already happening in Ukraine, obviously. There's major consolidation in Ukraine, but also in Belarus, there will be a revival of Belarusian culture. Was absolutely, if Russia is defeated and the Lukashenko regime would lose its legs under it, clearly, because I don't think it's really survivable, frankly, if Russia loses. Also, the Russian leverage, non-military leverage, like gas supply, for instance, or financial support would be undermined if they lose to both Belarus and their opportunity to mess with Moldova would be also undermined. So that's going to be a big deal, like I say. But first, we need to see how this war ends. I mean, obviously, we are hopeful in Ukraine. For Ukraine to be winning, for Ukraine to be on a winning side in this war, but we never know when it would end, at what cost, what cost to Russian, to Ukrainian economies and to the region. So, but to conclude, I would say that surprisingly, paradoxically enough, with all the horror and the scale of this invasion, there might be, paradoxically enough, some positive, bigger implications and outcomes and consequences for the entire region, including our three countries of Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Actually, before we open up for questions, I would like to take the issue that you raised about external powers position and influence, and I would like to address it to Vitaly and Miroslava. So what do you think regarding Belarus and Moldova respectively? What is the current kind of strategy or approach of external actors, primarily EU and the United States, towards these countries? And is there actually a strategy, or is all focus on assisting Ukraine right now?
From what I see and from what I hear from European and US political actors and diplomats, all eyes are obviously on Ukraine and Belarus, while being throughout 2020 and 21 because of massive protests, #1 European political and foreign policy issue. Obviously, the attention shifted to Ukraine. And since 24th of February, since Belarus became a launching pad for Russian military and infrastructure, for Russian soldiers and troops, there's no any communication and desire to talk and to find a way back to Minsk whatsoever. Even though it may look like there is some, particularly because the Secretary of State of Belarus, Mackey, is trying really hard lately to reach out to many foreign Western leaders and trying to take a position as if Belarus and Lukashenko personally did not have a choice and could not escape the participation in this conflict. But from what I see, even the last liberation of couple of political prisoners was surprisingly, and it was, I believe, really a prime example for what I'm for the thesis, what I'm for this thesis. The State Department and the White House statement was a very lean one paragraph sentence of basically we welcome the release of political prisoners, but that's pretty much it. So obviously nobody wants and will be talking to Lukashenko. Obviously Minsk, as many years before, this is the pattern that Lukashenko learned all too good to flip-flop between two chairs and two major cities, let's say Moscow and Brussels / Washington. There is no way back for the strategy, and there is, I believe, there will be not any communication or political or any kind of other cooperation with Minsk until the regime is gone. I just want to remind you that there is still no diplomatic representation. The last charge used to work Bill Fisher out of Vilnius, so there is no diplomatic relation, and I believe this is also, as you just already mentioned, it may sound strange and paradoxically maybe not right place, the time to say so, but this is the positive outcome of this war and then this conflict that this brings ultimately in the end of Lukashenko regime. And I believe the recognition of Tikhanovskaya in a broader sense is a big sign for the direction the West and the European Union envisioning with Belarus.
Thank you.
I just, what I see is the very resolute decision by the West, specifically by United States as a leader of this anti-Russians in support of Ukraine coalition. And obviously, it's all eyes on Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, because it's clear again. I'm repeating myself. That would be the face of both countries would be decided in Ukraine. But in the same time, the Western community is trying to bring Moldova closer, and the fact that they put Ukraine and Moldova in the package to give them pass to European Union, that's the clear sign that they would want to support Moldovan inspiration, specifically this government inspiration, as long as this government stand to join the European Union. And that's why Russia is trying to mess up with the government again to actually change the regime in Moldova right now. So that's what I see. And I talked to a couple of American generals recently, specifically General Petraeus told me that he sees that there is no turning point anymore for Russia and Ukraine, that Ukraine is winning this war. And unfortunately, but Putin is backed to the wall right now, and he has a very limited options how he can actually find a way out in this war. And so I would say Ukraine is not just hopeful, Ukraine is resolute on winning this war. So let's remind ourselves, half a year ago, nobody really believes that it's possible. But today we actually can say that it looks like it would be over. Maybe it would be a little bit worse. We'll see how, because
Before it gets better. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But in the end, I believe.
Thank you. And with that, I think we will open it up for questions. So please when asking a question, if you want to ask it to a specific speaker, please say so. Yes, yeah.
Thank you. This is great. Vitaly, I have a specific question to you. How's the resistance movement going in Belarus? We've seen some signs, some things that we know, some things that we don't.
You have to define what is resistance.
Resistance that is managed by the recognized outside government by Tikhanovskaya.
Not
Yeah.
much has changed. Not nothing has changed. As on the beginning of her presidency, President-elect Tikhanovskaya was recognized by just one as a president. Just one state, Lithuania, and this is the problem right there. So unless the president-elect is recognized and received a mandate to build a government in exile, because what makes a government, it's obviously territory, it's language, it's a culture, it's people and passports and recognition by other states. So extraterritorially, we have this all with the office of Tikhanovskaya, and she has all the power and the means to build the government in exile. She could have built it in the 21st century digitally, like Estonia made it for many years ago. And the only stone in the road in a way is, as you said, the recognition of the world, her as a president-elect. I saw this, we were just yesterday talking about the Belarus event. There has been a lot of resistance on the side of collectively on the West to do so, to recognize her as a president-elect and to grant her credentials and give her the opportunity to open up embassies or build the government and build a cabinet. And finally, she just recently announced cabinet. There has been a resistance from a side of the US and Europe before the war. Well, personally, after the 21st of February, I don't see any reason why Tikhanovskaya, who has been recognized by all European and foreign leaders, aside of, by the way, Putin and surprisingly still, it's a big shame for us, Zelensky. It's a big shame and a big burden on Belarusian society. But she's been recognized by everybody, received. So I believe if the West is serious about the situation with Belarus and the region, as so many times mentioned, right? The West should give her the tools and instruments to build the government, to build the new Belarus in exile, to issue passports, to give Belarusian people inside of a country and outside of country all legitimate tools and support to accelerate the end of regime. And this is the only way and only resistance and only way to combat the regime. I cannot think and see the possibility of peaceful or not peaceful resistance inside of country in form of protests and whatever, since the price for any protest and political engagement became unbelievably high. So you can get arrested and get prosecuted just for posts, for just being subscribed to the Telegram channel. And this spot, I just want to remind you, there's by now there are over 350 still and continuously growing the number of political prisoners in the country, and over 40,000 people went to jail in all those 2 years alone. 40,000. This is the size of a city like Izum, for instance. So I don't see the resistance in this particular form coming. Not to mention external factors like growing disapproval with Tikhanovskaya inside of country, growing approval and support of Lukashenko inside of Belarus. So these are all like side effects of it. But I believe that's the only way to resist politically from outside of a country. And this could obviously lead to all forms of creative solutions like nationalizing assets of Belarus abroad, getting Belarus rid of UN seat and grant it to the Tihanovsky office. So once the government as such is in place and is recognized and has the mandate to act as a government, there's a lot of tools and a lot of cool toys we can work with to make the life of Lukashenko regime even harder. I mean, just right before the war, and I know the time I'm aware, the EMF granted $1 billion grant to Belarus, which is ridiculous. So just imagine what could the office of Tikhanovskaya do for roughly 6 million people, Belarusian people inside of country and outside of country with this money. So just in order to motivate them to move away and get rid of regime. As right now, there's no such motivation or triggers for people. So
Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, one to Vitaly. You mentioned that you said that the Belarus regime, Lukashenko's regime, is destined to fall. You mentioned the comparison between the support of people between Russia and Belarus, that Lukashenko has only 30% of support inside the country. Does it imply that Lukashenko will be overthrown by its own people, like from the bottom? And what your assessment of do you think that the situation of 2020 or 2019, I don't remember exactly, when the mass protests involving millions of people were just suppressed and failed? And also one question to Vladimir. What are the exact conditions, criteria of the victory of Ukraine over Russia? Does it mean over recovery of Crimea, movement of Russia to the state before February 2022, or changing of the regime? Thank you.
Okay, let's start with
Okay. Well, yes, a very good question, obviously, because how do you define victory or loss? That's a major thing. The devil is in details, and recovering all Ukrainian territories that we've lost to Russian occupation over years would be the total victory, obviously, ultimate victory and triumph. But that might not happen, even though obviously Ukraine is trying to achieve that result. And Western support is forthcoming, and there is a strong, as Miroslav has said, resolute will and the spirit and Ukrainian people, and there is high morale. But yet there is also a steep and very high cost for Ukraine economically, for Ukrainian military. Ukrainian military is also, not something. You have humans there. You have not invincible people. They're also die, unfortunately, big numbers in this war. So we'll see. I think that this is a fluid question and issue for Ukrainians to decide in the coming months and years. And right now, of course, sociological polls are showing that Ukrainians don't want to have any territorial concessions.
What's the most realistic scenario?
The most realistic scenario, I think, would be for Russia to keep Crimea, and that's it in Ukraine. That would still be a problem, obviously, for us, because even occupation of Crimea would be definitely unacceptable, absolutely, to Ukrainians. But realistically speaking, on the ground, that might what might happen. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see. Actually, that Putin has cornered himself in such a way that he might lose even worse in a worse way. Then that might lead to actually, taking by Ukraine, Crimea taken back. Because we've seen already signs of Russian officers moving out, and even Russian battleships moving out of Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. That's another question in it. I mentioned it briefly, that Russian naval presence and domination in the Black Sea. I mean, turned into nothing, frankly, and there's no benefits out of it. And that's, I think, for the future generations of military scholars to study, like what happened there. Like not only they had the naval, the Black Sea Navy there, but they also brought some ships, obviously, as you know, from Baltic region and also Northern Sea, but they didn't help them in any way. You know, the only thing they do with the Navy, they launch their missiles. But you can launch missiles from strategic bombers, from land, so they don't really need a battleship to launch missiles. And it's vulnerable now. It's really vulnerable now. Frankly speaking, Ukraine, if it decides to do so, it might diminish the number of Russian battleships in the Black Sea even more drastically than it was done in previous months. So that's interesting. But I think whatever regime there is there in Moscow, you know, if Putin or post-Putin, they will fight for Crimea. And Russia is still, even wounded, even weakened, Russia is a strong enemy. It's a mortal enemy for Ukraine, and it's you know, it's still asymmetric conflict, still bigger country with nukes and resources and 3 times larger population. So I mean, I have to be frank. I mean, I'm not here in the position of Ukrainian politician or government person. I think we probably wouldn't be able to liberate Crimea, but we'll try. We'll try. Yeah.
I just would like to add that maybe this is the realistic scenario. However, I think with the Putin actually opening this opportunity for Ukraine, with this war is actually opportunity for Ukraine to liberate its territory and specifically liberate Crimea. So if not now, I don't know when. So I think Ukraine would go all the way in trying to get all the territory. And basically the end of this war, I talked to military commanders, I mean, and specifically forces on the ground. I was in Izum, in Kharkiv, in all this, in Odessa. They all are resolute that the end of this war, meaning changing regime in Moscow as well, and basically accepting that the regime, Russia has to accept the defeat. And only that will lead to some kind of security, possible security in the region. Right. Otherwise, it would be, the conflict would be.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Vitaly?
I'll keep it short to give my colleagues a little more time to my whole time. In short, I don't see this coming. The protest is really lost, obviously, over time, its momentum. Firstly, secondly, the regime itself became very sophisticated, very good about how to deal with crowds and how to suppress people. Keep in mind, Lukashenko and the regime were caught by surprise because such massive protests nobody have seen in our region in this scale. Maybe Ukraine is the only exception. So they were not prepared to deal with that. Now they really good at. So any gathering of people inside of Minsk shows that they are quite effective in getting people to spread and separate it and to shut down the communication infrastructure. Thirdly, the price, as I said, of products became so high never before, and people are just scared to death to be in any way politically affiliated. Because you get on a so-called blacklist in Belarus, which brings a lot of problems within, because you cannot find a job, you cannot get credit cards, you just like, you're excluded from society. Just today, I'll give you one example, and this is totally different world. This is not politics at all. One of my good friends from Belarus, a lady who has started the Russian Fashion Week 50 years ago in the good times, and was part of a German Fashion Week. So it's all about fashion. It's not politics. But even this type of industries are shut down just for eligible participation and not even protests, just at the march on the street. So the regime is not afraid to kick out all guests, designers, and shut down, like on a day of opening a huge fashion exhibit in downtown Minsk, just to make a statement and punish someone who is affiliated with the regime. Fifthly, a lot of people are, as I said, scared and afraid because a lot of people went to jail and seen firsthand the implication of political activism. So I don't see it coming from the street. Not to mention, as I said, that the belief in and triggers are just not there. We had 2020. A lot of momentum and a lot of excitement, and we had people being in this type of life situation, being shut down and locally kept within the country because of COVID lockdown. So this brought a lot of people to the streets as well, and obviously a good trigger election. So we don't have an election, we not see any election coming soon, this Lukashenko regime. So I don't see external triggers for that, not to mention leadership, because everybody is prosecuted already. So I don't see it common. I believe the field of, we don't have in Belarus, unlike in Russia, the elites, or unlike, for instance, during the revolution in Ukraine, elected officials or elites or media to support the grassroots activism in the country. So it should be, it will be just external reason for if such.
Thank you. We also have a question in Zoom. Let's read it now and then go back to the. No.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very fascinating, and I think timely to talk about Ukraine in the context of its neighbors. As the office director for Ukraine, Moldova, I'm a retired foreign service officer. Even before the war, 90% of the time focused on Ukraine, 10% of the time in the same office on Moldova and Belarus, so that you're exploring what are the consequences from Belarus and Moldova and Belarus for themselves, not just for the ultimate victory of Ukraine is critical. I would like to perhaps direct this to Vladimir, but ask the other colleagues to comment on it. Yes, the focus is Ukraine. The goal is ultimate victory. But we also have the reality that, as you've all articulated, not clear how long that will last, when that will be, and what victory will really look like. And Ukraine and Moldova and Belarus are countries in transition, clearly in terms of formulating their identity. Ukraine's identity has been strengthened by this war, continuation of the 2004. Moldova and Belarus have weak identities. I'm just wondering, what can the West do? What can the EU do, given the yet clear sense of we in Belarus, we in Moldova, to be sure that if this war in Ukraine drags on, unfortunately long, or is not clearly defined in a reasonable time frame, to be sure that Moldova and Belarus continue to evolve to strengthen this identity of we, a we that is necessary for the difficult decisions that come with any transition, and a we, when it ultimately comes to a decision, is the EU, the final destination for these two countries. So Vladimir said, in every tragedy, there may be some unique opportunities. I was wondering if you could expand on that, and especially what Western partners should do to try to help achieve that, despite the trajectory of things in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we should ask Vladimir first. And
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for watching our panel. But I think it's really important for the entire region, as we mentioned already, not just for Ukraine. It's really shaping up many things, this war and how it ends. First of all, the West is doing quite a lot, actually, as we speak. I mean, I definitely agree with what Miroslava has said, that prior to February this year, the West has been too timid often and showed no, no resoluteness in stopping potential Russian aggression. But since it started, it's doing reasonably well. I mean, look at the EU, at least in terms of energy policy. This is a major revolution. I mean, I didn't expect it, frankly. In Ukraine, we often see EU as kind of helpless and hopeless in many ways in terms of being a security player or actor, but it's been a major player. Not only they imposed sanctions on Russia, not only they provided assistance to Ukraine, and by assistance to Ukraine, actually it also includes assistance for Ukraine to buy weapons. That is something which is clearly revolutionary if you are talking about European Union, that EU gives money to Ukraine for weapons, not just for financial assistance and economic stabilization. And also they host refugees, millions of refugees. So, I mean, there is a huge role for EU, but on energy, like what Ursula von der Leyen has done in recent months, it's amazing, So therefore, and for NATO as well, NATO is emboldened. I mean, in 2014, people were joking that you should put Putin's monument next to the headquarters there, because NATO is suddenly having this, second breath, as they say, and understanding of a sense and the meaning of why they're there. What's the alliance supposed to be doing? But so since February 2022, I guess there should be like a whole park of little Putin monuments around the HQ. There for NATO, because there is a wake-up moment there, and not only people in the immediate vicinity like Baltics and Poles and Czechs and Romanians understand what's going on. I mean, it's a wake-up moment for a lot of people in the entire bloc. The eastern flank is reinforced. There is, for US, clearly you have this American leadership like I haven't seen it before. That's a major moment for US. I mean, for decades, you haven't probably seen anything like this since the end of the Cold War, I suppose. So we haven't seen anything remotely close to what you have now in American leadership on this process in putting this coalition together and helping Ukraine militarily, financially, and so on, applying pressure on Moscow. You have the contact group on defense of Ukraine. You have all this, what in Ukraine called Ramstein process, because the first meeting was at Ramstein base. So you actually have a lot of involvement by various players, particular countries, with Germany often criticized again for maybe slowly turning, doing the Zeitenwende, how they say it in German, but doing it. So for Germany, it's also kind of a revolution. For Germany, it's also kind of a revolution, like in the first days of this massive war, Chancellor announcing that they're going to be investing 100 billion euros into their defense and security sector. And sociological polls showing that absolute majority of Germans support this idea. I mean, this is all because of Russian invasion in Ukraine, but this is also because of Ukraine's resistance to this invasion and how successful this became. And therefore, we go back to this, statement and this thesis, really, that ironically, with all the cost of this horrible war, there might be in the longer run, some positive implications and consequences of this.
I would talk in terms of Moldova, probably. I think the Moldovan government today is doing a good job, and specifically Sandu is doing a good job with the pro-Western policies and actually consolidating its nation. However, it's in a very vulnerable position today, specifically because of the war and specifically because of the very high energy prices in Moldova. So the one thing that the West should do today is to support Sandu government to withstand this crisis. And it's a small country, and it's actually small price to pay for the future of the region. So this would be my 5 cents in Moldovan case. And I think Vitaly.
Sure. To Belarus, first of all, I absolutely disagree to label countries and opposition forces, democratic forces in Belarusian people, particularly Moldovan people, of course, well, as a weak entities. This is absolutely not right. And the problem lies in a different sphere. It's not a problem of identities. It's not a problem of question of weak or strong identities. It's a different identity stronger. How do we measure it? I believe if we talk about Belarusian identity, there's probably not a stronger event in the whole long history of my country that has been in 2020 that led to creation and manifestation of Belarusian identity as it is. A peaceful movement led by free women that brought very experienced and long year dictatorship almost to its end. I believe it's whatever it is, but it's not a weak identity. And millions of people on the streets supporting the cause and going to the polls and voting and electing Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as a legitimate president is not a sign of boredness. It's not a sign of weak identity. It's a strong identification with its culture, language, and its destiny. How can we strengthen that identity was the question, part of the question. Well, we have to be frank. The only way to strengthen the identity is to give Belarusian people the opportunity to liberate themselves, to become a nation, independent, sovereign country with Belarusian language, with democratically elected president, currently Tikhanovskaya, or whatever may be later, to give people the opportunity to live their life. What the circular question was, what the Western partners should do. This is a very common question, and I hear it multiple times, and it feels like the question is in nowhere, because it's obvious what Western partners should do. I believe it's obvious that the opposition doesn't have tools on hand to change the regime. So the only thing the Western partners could do is help the democratically elected president to build, as I said, the government, to recognize Tikhanovskaya as elected official and as elected president, to give her and her cabinet all legitimate power and tools on hand to build the government in exile, and therefore recognize and give her a seat in the UN and help the Belarusian people to build the country exterritorially for now, and develop the real, if we talk about identity, the real identity, what it means to be. It means the language, the culture, the own passport that is recognized by European countries, that it's recognized by Western world, and show more desire on political side, and show more interest, strategic interest, and declare Belarus as a sphere of influence and interest for the European Union as a next step towards EU membership, maybe one day. But if this is not the goal, if there is no desire to declare and to see Belarus as a European sphere of influence and interest, we will have, with no tools on hand and with no army, with no even a recognized president, we have almost nothing we can do, and will be brought back to the results of how we lived before 2020. And basically this is what West could do, and this is what the West knows how to do. So it's should be just done, as simple as that.
Thank you. We have several more questions. Let's take final round of questions and wrap this up because we have about 10 minutes left. So let's start. David, do you want to ask?
Maybe I could target this mostly to Miroslava. If the last question looked a little bit to the west of these three countries, I'd like to ask a question looking east. One part is, what are other countries on the periphery of Russia? What lessons are they drawing from Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, their situations? I'm thinking of Azerbaijan, which some analysts seem to be suggesting they're already drawing a couple of lessons by recent developments. Kazakhstan, other countries over there, and then also China. Does China in all of this seem to have any independent foreign policy for Belarus, for Moldova, or is the sense really that China is looking all of its foreign policy through Moscow and what's going on in Ukraine? Welcome any thoughts on those questions.
Okay, let's take other questions as well.
Oh,
You'll respond.
My question is also.
Oh.
Moldova has traditionally been a migrant sending country, and with the war in Ukraine, more than 500,000 migrants have crossed the Moldovan border. You pointed out the problems with the government at hand right now. What kind of support does the government expect in helping out the migrants from the West to ensure that there is no anti-migrant sentiment going in?
Okay, so really?
Yes, I would like to push back to the position of the major players, to key players in this conflict. Volodymyr provided us with some details about the position of EU, how it has been changed dramatically. But I would like to know, will you see any indications how Turkey will change its position in this conflict? And what kind of game changer it might be if Turkey changed its position in the conflict? Because, well, this is one of the key players in the Black Sea region. Thanks.
Yeah, my question is to Miroslava and to Vladimir together, relating with Transnistria, but at the same time it's rather hypothetical. So let's imagine tomorrow Russia will cut off the gas pipeline through Ukraine. So who will die first, the government of Sandu or the regime in Transnistria? In your opinion?
If tomorrow happens what?
Russia will cut off the gas pipeline through Ukraine.
Okay, no more questions from them, right? Okay, so let's wrap this up. Let's go starting from Miroslava, then Vladimir,
Okay,
then Vitaly.
in terms of other countries in periphery, and we know that all those countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, they all had a very strong pro-Russian sentiments before the war. However, we seeing is changing rapidly with this war. And actually, lately you can find on YouTube that since Russians are running from the war and running to all these countries, they are populating Georgia, they are populating Kazakhstan. So the people, Georgians and Kazakhs, can come to them and ask them questions like, whose is Crimea? Why you came to this country? Go to your country and fight your regime. Why you came here to hide? So this war actually brought much more resolute position in those countries to be more independent and make their own decisions, because they are all afraid that if the war in Ukraine would end up with defeat of Ukraine, I don't think it's possible at all. However, they would be the next. So, and they want to be, and they wanted to be friendly with Russia. However, they want to be independent. They want to make their own decisions. So this how I see how this plays out in those countries. In terms of China, China had very strategic policies toward Belarus and Ukraine. They wanted to have trade routes to Europe through those countries. However, lately, China, with the war in Ukraine, had to freeze some of their operations in Ukraine, and specifically through the routes through Ukraine to Belarus. So China actually, in some way, are losing in this conflict. So it's clear that they are just standing behind and waiting for the things to clear up. But they are not, they are a little bit, they're cautious and fearful of what can happen in that. In terms of migrants, honestly, I cannot answer that question. Again, I think when we talked about what has to be done, I think we have to really make sure that Sandu government would be able to stand there and have their freedom of the press and actually and have the means to support migrants and support its own people, because this is the major issue. It's all correlated together. In terms of gas pipeline, whoa, this is the big. I mean, we know that the Transnistria has the biggest, the energy power plant. So, I mean, I think Russia would like to keep it and keep this running, and they can cut off the supplies to Moldova, but they probably would try to keep it running in Transnistria. So I don't know who can decide.
There are different branches of.
Actually, I cannot answer that particular. Maybe Vladimir has more information.
Well, let's start from this one then. I think that whatever leverage Russia had with Moldova is pretty much diminished right now, frankly, be it militarily or be it energy-wise or financially. There is still some leverage left, but of course, Russia being so busy and occupied with Ukraine and trying to overcome Ukraine's resistance, it really undermines what they can do to many other directions, including Moldova. I think I agree with everyone who already mentioned that that Moldova is a small country, important though, and for the West, European Union and others, it would be easy enough for them to pull Moldova out of whatever trouble it gets into. And again, if Russia loses this war against Ukraine, that would be a major blow to any pro-Russian political forces and sentiments in Moldova, frankly. So I think that for the foreseeable future, if indeed Russia loses this war vis-a-vis Ukraine, that would be probably the end of this strong positioning for the pro-Russian forces in Moldova. So actually, by the way, we might see the return of Guam, that the Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Moldova format, which was dormant, basically non-existent, frankly. Formally, it was there, but in real life, it wasn't now, because, well, actually, the Georgia is probably surprisingly the most fledgling part of it now, because of their hesitations vis-a-vis Russia and how to react to the Russian aggression. Unfortunately, so as you know, probably, I mean, there is a strong position of most of the Georgian people, and then there is a Georgian government. There is a major disconnect there, and there is basically the whole movement in Georgia, like national shame, like why is our government not supporting Ukraine more, actually. But so in the longer run, I think, by the way, this pro-Russian political elite, which is now in power in Georgia, would also be weakened if Russia loses. So, and yeah, right. Yeah, and there's Georgia, the Ukraine. Ukraine could be a regional leader. We've been talking for years, if not decades, trying to answer this question: can Ukraine be a leader in the region? It can. Even though it would be thrown back years in terms of economic devastation that we're now facing, and the need for recovery and rebuilding clearly will depend on Western support. Other than this, the Ukraine is becoming subject, taking its own fate in our hands. With this heroic struggle vis-a-vis Russian aggression, really makes it a natural regional leader. And here's Azerbaijan. And look where, I think yesterday, Prime Minister of Moldova, Natalia Gavrilica was. She was in Baku. She was negotiating new energy deal. That's interesting. And Baku, you mentioned Azerbaijan, and of course, Azerbaijan is taking a very interesting position here, not only in terms of its fight with Armenia, but also in terms of providing European Union with energy. That's in your face to Russia, because actually Baku was much more cautious prior to February of this year in doing anything which might irritate Moscow. And now they are saying, okay, fine, that's we can do it now if you're European Union. And there's some criticism of the European Union in terms of what's going to be the price for this rapprochement with Azerbaijan. It would be at the cost of neglecting the situation with human rights in Azerbaijan. That's a different subject there, different discussion there, but there is something happening there. But finally, on the Russian periphery, it's a big periphery. Obviously, it's a big country. So not only Azerbaijan, we mentioned that. Look at what's happening to CSTO. It's basically not there anymore. It's dead. It's hollow structure. I mean, and I remember how people prior to February this year looked at the Russian quick military landing in operation in Kazakhstan and said, look how powerful Russia is. They have this, force projection. They quickly moved in and out, and now it's like, really? And what Kazakhstan is doing also in your face to Russia in many ways. And but there's going to be a lot of problems there, including hosting 100,000 Russians now in Kazakhstan, maybe more, and who knows who these people are. It's some kind of a silent, it could be a silent invasion there, frankly. So you don't really know who these people are. Are they really the opponents of the regime, and therefore people who are disgusted with Putin and don't want him to fall, or is it something else there? So you don't know. But Kazakhstan is clearly taking position on these issues. And finally, China, there's a whole big subject there. Obviously, very disappointed with how Russia has shown a weak hand here, and how it let down China with signing this major document on strategic cooperation immediately prior to February 24th, and promising a quick surgeon operation there in Ukraine, in and out, winning within days, and still ongoing. So that's a problem, obviously, but also until in terms of India, India, it's a moment of waking up for India. Like, which side are you on? The question's been asked already, and Indians are defending, oh yeah, we're buying natural gas, yes, but Europeans are buying even more of it. Yes, we depend on Russian, arms supply and so on, but maybe not anymore. There's already been a major reassessment of where India should be buying its arms in the future. So I think there is such a huge, basically, how would you say, the cascade of reactions around the Russian periphery. But then again, it will depend on how this war ends. It's not ending yet. It's going to be dragging on for some time. If Russia finds some resources in it for turning it around somehow, this conflict, this war, it might be different. But if it continues to lose like it's been looking like for several last months, then it's going to be a major cascade of implications on entire periphery. And on Turkey, it's a great question. And by the way, I'll be teaching this term here, the course on the Black Sea regional security. The model course, it starts on October 31st. And Turkey is a major player. They've been trying to be sitting on the fence in many ways, balancing, mediating, and Erdogan, he was trying, obviously, and still is, to be in a position to talk to both sides, which is kind of useful to Ukraine, I think, frankly, because a lot of Ukrainians are often upset, like, why is Ankara behaving like this is not our friend and not more of an anti-Russian, but at the same time, it helps to have someone like Erdogan, who is talking to both Kremlin and Brussels and Washington and Kiev, and we'll see if he manages to improve his standing rating internationally in the wider Black Sea region or not. Again, it comes to this question, like, what happens with this war and what will be the final outcome of it.
And one more implication, I think it's very important to see all this so-called, here it's called breakaway regions,
Yeah.
but as Transnistria, Abkhazia, Ossetia, and so
Oh, yeah.
on, I think this is the result of this war can actually help to clear up the territories. And from the view from Kyiv, they actually sometimes call for Moldova, the Russians are weakening, take your territory back. Georgians, Russians are weakening, take your territories back. So they actually have expect then the local government, the government of the countries would actually act more
Not
forcefully.
even mentioning Azerbaijan and Armenia situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is the opportunity as well to actually clean that that cancer that was Russia was creating around the region. So.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists and all of the participants. I think we finished on time. I don't want to sum it up, but I think the discussion illustrates that the region is pretty much in flux, and there are no clear kind of answers and predictions because, of course, everything hinges upon the outcome of this war, and no one knows exactly when and how it will end. But I hope our speakers provided some perspectives that make it more clear how the dynamics in the region is evolving, and some useful lenses to look at the situation in the future. And I would like you to ask you to join me thanking them.